My sister Serena grinned like a predator as she leaned across the polished oak table, her voice dripping venom. Smile, Leech. Drink this, it'll make you lighter. I froze champagne glass trembling in my hand, the golden liquid catching the chandelier light sparkling like a trap. I'm Arena Kilm, 24, and tonight at my graduation, I realized the celebration was a lie. The room buzzed with laughter and applause, yet I felt a cold weight in my stomach, a warning I could not ignore. My parents, Grady and Noella, sat nearby, their smiles serene, almost mocking, as if they had scripted every second of this cruel scene. Serena's fingers brushed my hand as she slid the glass closer, a subtle but deliberate push that could end me in a heartbeat. My pulse raced, adrenaline spiking, and for the first time I truly saw my family, their obsession with control, the venom behind their polished faces. I had been the target of every cruel joke, every whispered insult, every accidental humiliation, but tonight it escalated. Poison right here in plain sight, and nobody but me aware. The glittering crowd, the proud relatives, the photographers snapping smiles, they were blind to the danger, blind to the rage and fear burning inside me. My mind sharpened, calculating, cold, and ruthless. This was not just a threat, it was a declaration. And I would respond, not with tears, not with silence. Tonight I would strike back, and everyone watching would witness justice slow, precise, and unforgettable. The glittering hall of Oak Ridge Hotel seemed to pulse with laughter and music. Yet for me, Arena Kilm, every note was a knife twisting deeper into my awareness. Serena's eyes locked onto mine across the room, her smile predatory, sending chills down my spine. I could feel her waiting for the perfect moment, that split second when my guard would falter to act. My parents, Grady and Noella, glowed with fake pride, their hands clasped in synchronized applause as I accepted my diploma, oblivious to the danger. Every step I took toward the podium felt like a march through a minefield. I was hyper-aware of every flicker, every movement, every whisper that might reveal Serena's malicious intent. Then it happened. As I raised my glass for a toast, Serena brushed past me, her hand lingering on my wrist, a calculated, deliberate touch that sent a shiver of fear down my arm. My heart lurched. The glass trembled slightly in my grip, and in that fraction of a second, I saw the faint, greenish tint at the bottom, almost imperceptible, but unmistakably there if you knew what to look for. Panic surged, but I forced myself to inhale slowly, recalling the self-defense strategies I had read about in college and psychology books about manipulation and survival. I had learned to read people to anticipate their moves, and tonight I needed every bit of that knowledge. Serena hissed under her breath. "Drink, Arena. Make it quick." The words were like venom, sharp and low. Only I could hear them, yet I knew if anyone else glanced our way, they would see nothing but a sister offering a toast. My pulse raced, and I felt the familiar weight of my father's indifference pressing down on me. Grady's eyes met mine briefly, but there was no alarm. No warning, just that calm, detached look that had haunted me my entire life. My mother Noella laughed softly at a comment from the caterer, oblivious to the imminent threat. I clenched my jaw, every muscle in my body coiled for action. I could not afford to hesitate. I subtly shifted the glass to the side, careful to keep it in full view of the crowd, all while calculating Serena's next move. I knew she would escalate if I showed fear. Around me, guests cheered and clinked glasses, the room sparkling with chandeliers, the air thick with perfume and cologne masking the tension in my mind. The noise was a shield and a threat. I had to stay perfectly composed while my instincts screamed danger. Serena leaned closer, her lips almost brushing my ear, whispering another threat. "You'll regret tonight if you don't follow through." The touch was deliberate, meant to intimidate, and yet I felt a surge of clarity. I remembered every insult, every humiliation she had inflicted over the years, every time my parents had sided with her, the gaslighting that had eroded my confidence and made me question my own worth. But tonight the table had turned. Tonight I would not be passive. I took a calculated sip of sparkling water I had hidden in my clutch moments before, pretending it was champagne, all while maintaining a poised smile for the photographers capturing the moment. The crowd erupted in applause at the speech I had prepared, unaware of the silent war raging at the table behind me. Serena's expression flickered a microsecond of confusion, perhaps frustration that her plan had failed, but she quickly masked it with a grin, maintaining the illusion of a sisterly toast. I could feel her tension, the subtle tightening of her hands on the tablecloth, the way her posture shifted, preparing for a more aggressive maneuver. My mind raced, recalling the exact chemicals she might have used, the effects, the speed at which they would act. I had no time to be scared. Precision was crucial. Every movement, every glance needed to be calculated. My parents continued to applaud completely unaware, and I realized that their approval of Serena's actions had conditioned me to stay silent all these years. Not tonight. Tonight, every fiber of my being screamed survival, intelligence, and revenge. I caught the eye of my best friend Julian, who had been seated at a distance pretending to chat with a group of guests, but aware of the tension in my posture. He gave a subtle nod, a sign that he understood something was wrong and that he was ready to act if necessary. That tiny acknowledgement was a lifeline. The crowd continued to cheer, but my awareness narrowed to a tunnel vision of threat strategy and timing. I had rehearsed every step, every subtle redirection, every plausible excuse to avoid drinking the poisoned liquid without alerting anyone prematurely. Serena was unpredictable, capable of switching tactics in milliseconds, so I needed to maintain control. I allowed her to lean in again lightly, tapping my wrist, and I responded with the gentlest shift, causing the glass to slide slightly to the side out of reach. Her eyes widened for an instant, registering that I was no longer vulnerable. That moment of realization was all I needed to feel the first flicker of triumph. I smiled politely at her, the kind of smile that hides calculation and confidence, and she recoiled ever so slightly, recognizing that the hunt had changed direction. My parents remained oblivious, their applause continuing as I moved my attention back to the podium, the diploma now in my free hand, feeling the surge of empowerment coursing through me. Every insult, every gaslight, every act of control Serena had exercised over me was now fuel. The adrenaline pumping through my veins was no longer fear, it was power. I knew the night was far from over, but in that room filled with glittering faces and oblivious cheer, I had gained the first tactical advantage. Serena's plan had been thwarted in the smallest but most crucial way, and I was ready for the next move. The stage was set, and the audience unknowingly was about to witness a confrontation that would expose every lie, every cruelty, and every hidden truth of my family. The room erupted in applause as I stepped back from the podium, but my mind, Arena Kilm, was locked on the subtle poisonous maneuver Serena had tried to execute moments ago. I could feel the weight of every eye in the hall on me, yet my focus was singular, precise. Serena, now realizing that her plan had failed, attempted to recover her smile, brittle and forced teeth showing just enough to hint at malice. She approached with deliberate steps, her hand poised as if to guide my glass back into play, but I anticipated every motion. I stopped in the center of the hall, letting the chandelier's light glint off my diploma, catching the attention of every guest. "Serena," I said, voice steady yet cold, cutting through the music and chatter. "Would you care to explain why you slipped poison into my drink?" The room went silent for the fraction of a second that stretched into eternity. Gasps erupted, heads turned, and I could see the flicker of horror in my parents' faces. Grady's jaw tightened. Noella's hands froze mid-applause, and for the first time that evening they were truly aware of what had just transpired. Serena's lips twitched, forming words that never fully escaped. I could almost hear the cogs in her mind spinning the desperate calculation of how to deflect, how to lie, how to maintain the facade she had so meticulously constructed. But I was ready. "Everyone heard that right," I added, raising my voice slightly, letting the words echo through the room. "You all saw her touch my wrist, saw the glass, and now know what she intended." Cameras flashed, friends whispered, and I saw Julian, my ally, inch closer, ready to intervene if needed. Serena's face turned red, a storm of embarrassment and anger brewing simultaneously. I took another step forward, forcing the space between us to become a stage, the hall now a theater for the drama I had long prepared for. And to think I continued projecting every ounce of controlled fury that our own parents, Grady and Noella, have stood by, silently letting her manipulate, threaten, and humiliate me for years. There was a collective intake of breath from the guests. The air was thick with disbelief and fascination. Some clutched their champagne flutes tighter, some whispered nervously, and the tension was palpable. My parents' faces drained of color, realizing that their complicity could no longer remain hidden. I could see Grady opening his mouth, attempting a weak defense, but I cut him off. No excuses, Dad. No laughter, Mom. Everyone can see the truth now. Serena staggered back slightly, her plan collapsing, the reality of public exposure dawning on her. I watched her pivot, trying to maintain dominance through aggression, but my composure was ironclad. Every movement measured, every word a scalpel exposing her lies. "You thought this graduation would be just another opportunity to humiliate me," I said, locking eyes with her, "but instead, it has become your reckoning." Guests leaned forward, the shock rippling through the room as I outlined specific incidents enough to reveal the pattern of harassment, manipulation, and malice, but carefully curated to avoid defamation outside the party. Every accusation landed with clarity, the evidence implicit in gestures, reactions, and whispered admissions. Serena's shoulders sagged, the mask of confidence shattered. My parents tried to interrupt, but I ignored them, fully aware that their attempts would only further expose their negligence. "Everyone can see now," I said, voice rising just enough to command attention, "that this family has secrets, that this family harbors cruelty behind smiles and applause, and that tonight accountability has finally arrived." The guests' murmurs transformed into murmurs of sympathy and shock, eyes darting between Serena, my parents, and me. I could see the subtle tremor in Serena's hands, the twitch of her jaw, and the faint glimmer of tears threatening to reveal genuine fear. This was my victory, carefully orchestrated, executed with precision, and observed by hundreds. I had weaponized the setting, the audience, and the anticipation to create an exposure that could not be ignored. The chandeliers glimmered like judgment in their brilliance, reflecting the cascade of reactions around us. Some guests exchanged looks, nodding in silent support. Others whispered in awe at the boldness of my public confrontation. Julian stepped slightly forward, a reassuring presence, his eyes locked on mine, silently confirming that I was not alone. Serena attempted one last maneuver, a feigned smile, a tilt of the head meant to reassert control, but it fell flat against the collective awareness of the crowd. I had transformed vulnerability into strategy, fear into empowerment, chaos into clarity. Every detail of the poisoning attempt, every prior act of cruelty, every instance of parental indifference had been weaponized into undeniable proof, staged perfectly under the lights, witnessed by everyone. The room's energy shifted, a tangible current of shock, judgment, and disbelief sweeping through the air. I felt my own pulse steadying, the adrenaline now tempered with satisfaction. I had achieved the impossible, turning the moment meant to harm me into a spectacle of accountability, a display that would linger in memory long after the final toast. Serena's expression was a mask of fury, shame, and disbelief. My parents were silent, stripped of authority in front of witnesses, and the room buzzed with the aftermath of revelation. I lowered my voice, delivering the final blow verbally, ensuring no ambiguity, no escape. "Tonight, everyone sees the truth. Let this be the lesson we all remember." The applause was hesitant, a mixture of sympathy, relief, and awe, but it confirmed that the shift had occurred. Serena sank into her seat, defeated, while my parents remained frozen, realizing that public exposure could not be undone. The night's tension had reached its peak, the confrontation complete, and the consequences set in motion. I stood in the center of the hall, fully aware that the game had changed forever, that my public stand had rewritten the power dynamics, and that from this moment, Serena's influence over me and the silence of my parents could no longer dominate my life. The room slowly descended into murmurs as the initial shock of my confrontation settled, every guest processing the magnitude of what had just unfolded. I, Arena Kilm, could feel the tension vibrating through the air, a mixture of awe, sympathy, and judgment directed towards Serena and my parents Grady and Noella. Serena sat frozen, her face pale and trembling, a stark contrast to the forced smiles she had worn for years, and I could see the realization of public disgrace fully registering in her eyes. My parents, once figures of authority and control, were now exposed, their silence interpreted by everyone as complicity. Their prior gaslighting revealed in sharp relief, and I could sense their helplessness as the crowd, my friends, and even distant relatives began whispering about years of unspoken cruelty. Guests who had previously avoided confronting the family's toxic patterns now exchanged knowing glances, some murmuring their own experiences, others overtly nodding in support of my courage to speak out. I moved deliberately through the hall, observing every reaction, noting the subtle shift in dynamics, the power now firmly in my hands, not as an act of vengeance for its own sake, but as a calculated reclamation of dignity. Serena attempted to rise, a feeble attempt to regain control, but Julian, sensing the need for physical proximity as reinforcement, stepped closer, his presence a silent shield, and she faltered, caught between embarrassment and the fear of further exposure. I addressed the crowd once more, voice steady and unwavering, recounting in measured detail the manipulations, intimidation, and threats I had endured, carefully ensuring that every revelation was precise, impactful, and undeniable without veering into exaggeration, creating a record that would linger in the minds of all present. The guests' reactions intensified. Some gasped audibly, others clasped their hands over their mouths, and a few discreetly recorded parts of my speech on their phones, understanding the significance of witnessing such a public unmasking. My parents tried to interject to mitigate the damage, but their voices were drowned by the overwhelming clarity of my narrative. Their attempts at rationalization only highlighting the extent of their neglect and moral failure. Serena's cheeks flushed crimson, her fingers twisting nervously in her lap, and I could see the subtle signs of panic, the knowledge that her reputation was irreversibly tarnished. I had orchestrated this moment with care, turning what could have been a quiet, private humiliation into a public reckoning that no one could dismiss or forget. As I spoke, I noticed the expressions of former allies who had supported Serena quietly over the years, shifting their doubts becoming visible, and I realized that the ripple effect of truth was already spreading, isolating her further. My voice took on a firmer tone as I concluded the account of her actions, highlighting the courage required to confront such betrayal, and the necessity of holding those who enable toxicity accountable, emphasizing not vengeance, but justice and transparency, a lesson for anyone who might witness similar patterns. Serena's shoulders slumped completely, a symbol of her defeat, while my parents' faces betrayed an unspoken mix of shame, guilt, and fear, and I could sense the silent judgment of the crowd settling upon them like a heavy weight. In the aftermath, whispers turned to conversations, and conversations into debates among the guests, the story of deceit, attempted poisoning, and public confrontation dominating the discourse. Some approached me to offer comfort apologies for having ignored warning signs in the past, and admiration for the strength it took to face such hostility publicly, while others silently acknowledged the bravery required to overturn the family's established hierarchy in such a decisive manner. Serena, now fully aware of the social consequences, retreated into a corner, her attempts to reconcile or defend herself futile, and I observed the isolation she experienced, a direct result of the calculated exposure I had executed. Grady and Noella, confronted by the undeniable evidence of their complicity, were forced to reconsider their relationships and control, understanding that their inaction had allowed cruelty to flourish and that public perception now dictated accountability beyond their private sphere. The night continued, yet the energy in the room had irrevocably shifted. The aura of dominance that Serena once wielded had been replaced by palpable caution, respect, and acknowledgement of truth, and I felt a profound sense of empowerment, knowing that my intelligence, composure, and strategic execution had rewritten the family's narrative. Every smile, nod, and whispered acknowledgement from the crowd reinforced the lesson: toxic behavior cannot survive in the light of courage and exposure. I felt the satisfaction of justice not in vengeance but in clarity, the irreversible demonstration that manipulation, threats, and poison, literal and metaphorical, cannot prevail when confronted decisively, publicly, and intelligently. Guests who had initially doubted the depth of familial dysfunction now spoke openly about patterns they had witnessed, validating my account and further solidifying the social consequences for Serena and my parents. By the end of the evening, the party meant to celebrate personal achievement had transformed into a living testament of exposure, accountability, and the power of strategic confrontation, leaving all present with a clear understanding of the dynamics that had allowed toxicity to persist and the repercussions that finally followed. As I left the center of the hall, diploma in hand, I carried not only my academic accomplishment, but also the undeniable proof that courage, intelligence, and strategic public confrontation could dismantle manipulation and control, establishing a precedent that would influence every interaction moving forward and cementing a sense of justice felt by all witnesses. Serena's defeated posture, my parents' shocked silence, and the crowd's supportive acknowledgement collectively marked a turning point, a definitive statement that my voice once suppressed now commanded recognition, respect, and consequences that could not be ignored. After the initial shock had rippled through the room and the echoes of whispers and gasps still lingered in the hall, Irina Kilm knew that the confrontation alone was only the first step in reclaiming my life and dismantling the toxic structures my sister Serena and my parents Grady and Noella had maintained for years. The adrenaline of exposure was powerful, but without a clear strategy, it could fade, allowing them to regroup and reassert their control. That night, as I returned to the quiet of my apartment, the reality of what had transpired settled in, and I began meticulously planning my next moves, ensuring every action was deliberate, precise, and legally sound. I knew that intelligence and patience would be more effective than impulsive revenge. Impulsivity could be twisted against me, but a calculated approach would leave them no room to escape accountability. I started by gathering evidence, text messages, emails, and recordings that corroborated my public account, organizing everything chronologically to create an irrefutable narrative. Every threat Serena had made, every subtle manipulation my parents had enabled, every attempt to discredit me had to be documented, transformed into a record that no one could ignore. A fortress of truth built from years of suppressed experiences. Consulting with a trusted attorney, I learned the legal ramifications of the attempted poisoning and the family's emotional abuse, discovering avenues for formal consequences beyond the court of public opinion, which included potential charges and restraining orders. I created a timeline linking past incidents to my current evidence, demonstrating a consistent pattern of toxicity that could not be brushed aside or minimized. While Serena had relied on charm and superficial social manipulation to protect herself, my approach was grounded in facts, foresight, and strategy, turning the tools she used for intimidation into a weapon against her. I coordinated discreetly with key guests from the graduation, including witnesses who had initially been hesitant to speak up, ensuring that their observations could be leveraged to corroborate my account if necessary. And I provided guidance on what details were most critical to emphasize, without embellishment, preserving the credibility of the narrative. Parallel to legal preparations, I devised a public communication plan. Social media could amplify the consequences, but it had to be handled carefully to avoid misinterpretation or legal complications. I drafted statements that framed the events, truthfully highlighting the attempted poisoning, emotional abuse, and manipulations, all while maintaining my composure and moral high ground, emphasizing accountability rather than vindictiveness. In this phase, every word, gesture, and post was calculated, designed to maximize impact while leaving no loophole for Serena or my parents to manipulate the story or shift blame. Simultaneously, I began establishing boundaries within my family network, identifying allies who were genuinely supportive and isolating those who might enable further toxicity, strengthening my personal support system for the challenges ahead. Each decision was informed by the lessons I had learned from years of navigating control and intimidation. I anticipated their likely responses, preparing countermeasures in advance, turning predictability into leverage. As days passed, I implemented subtle psychological strategies to undermine Serena's attempts at social recovery, allowing natural consequences to occur without overt confrontation, creating an environment where her own network recognized her instability and manipulation without my interference. The culmination of these efforts was a carefully orchestrated public revelation during a family gathering organized under the guise of reconciliation, where I presented evidence, called witnesses, and allowed Serena and my parents to confront their actions in a setting that ensured accountability was undeniable. The audience, now composed of extended family friends and respected community members, reacted not only to the shocking revelations, but also to the meticulous, intelligent, and unassailable way I had structured the confrontation. Every detail had been anticipated: the timing of disclosures, the sequencing of evidence, and the emotional pacing of the narrative, ensuring maximum clarity and impact. Serena's initial shock quickly turned to visible panic. She attempted to interject to manipulate the interpretation of events, but each attempt was preemptively neutralized by my preparation, leaving her flustered, her credibility eroding in real time. My parents, too, faced the full weight of scrutiny, unable to justify their past inaction or dismiss the comprehensive evidence I presented. The crowd's response was immediate, a combination of empathy for my resilience and judgment for the toxic behaviors, creating a social environment in which Serena and my parents could no longer hide behind charm, fear, or reputation. By the end of the gathering, the consequences were clear. Serena's social standing had plummeted, my parents' authority had been publicly challenged, and I had established a precedent for accountability that extended beyond my immediate family, influencing community perception and the way future interactions would unfold. This strategic retaliation, executed with intelligence, foresight, and emotional control, was not about vengeance. It was about reclaiming autonomy, establishing justice, and demonstrating that manipulation and violence, even when cloaked in familial bonds, could be confronted decisively and publicly with lasting effect. I felt a profound sense of empowerment as I observed the results, recognizing that every detail of my plan had contributed to a shift in the family's dynamics and social standing, reinforcing the principle that calculated, intelligent action could dismantle entrenched patterns of abuse, leaving consequences visible, inevitable, and instructive for all who witnessed them. In the days following, Serena's attempts to regain normalcy were met with skepticism, isolation, and scrutiny, while my own reputation was bolstered by the integrity, clarity, and courage of my actions, and I knew that the long-term repercussions would cement the lessons learned not only within my family, but also in the broader community that had observed the unfolding drama. Every carefully executed step had ensured that justice was both seen and felt, that the toxic cycle was disrupted, and that my voice, once suppressed, now resonated with undeniable authority, shaping the narrative in a way that could not be reversed. The day of the family gathering arrived, a gathering that had been carefully framed as a neutral reunion. Yet beneath the polished invitations and polite smiles lay the storm I had meticulously prepared over the past weeks. A storm designed to expose Serena Kilm and my parents, Grady and Noella, in the most undeniable way possible. As I entered the hall, the air was thick with anticipation, whispers rippling through distant relatives and neighbors, everyone unaware that the seemingly innocent gathering would become the stage for truths long suppressed. I maintained calm, each step measured, each greeting polite but firm, knowing that composure would amplify the impact of what I was about to reveal, while any hint of panic could undermine my carefully constructed authority. Guests slowly settled, and I sensed Serena's unease, her polished facade beginning to crack under the weight of anticipation, her eyes darting to my side as if searching for a secret signal, but I gave none. I began with an innocuous recounting of past events, framing my words in neutral language, letting memories of subtle manipulations, emotional gaslighting, and threats emerge naturally. Each story corroborated by discreetly positioned witnesses who nodded at key moments, reinforcing credibility without interruption. The tension in the room escalated with every sentence, a crescendo that no one could ignore, until I moved to the most critical moment, the evidence of the attempted poisoning at my graduation, an act that had once been hidden in fear, but now lay exposed under the scrutiny of dozens of eyes. I presented text messages, photographs, and recorded conversations, each piece introduced with calm precision, leaving Serena scrambling to construct any counter-narrative, her previously confident demeanor now faltering. As I described the moment she slipped the poison into my drink, the room collectively inhaled the weight of shock, palpable. Gasps, murmurs, and whispered, "Oh my gods," spread, confirming the visceral impact of the revelation. Serena's lips trembled, her voice attempting to interject, but I had preemptively addressed every possible objection, every plausible excuse, each point dismantled logically, leaving her no ground to stand on a masterclass in strategic exposure. I then turned attention to my parents detailing their complicity, their passive approval of Serena's manipulations, their failures to protect me over years, all framed within the chronological evidence I had prepared, highlighting a pattern of enabling and emotional abuse. Their faces drained of color, attempts at justification, faltering as the witnesses corroborated each claim, creating a synergy of truth that could not be contested or dismissed. The emotional intensity peaked as I shifted to the consequences Serena would now face both socially and legally, demonstrating that actions have ramifications and that accountability cannot be avoided when the facts are undeniable and public. Guests reacted with a mixture of empathy, disbelief, and support, their responses validating the narrative I had meticulously structured. Even those who had once doubted me were now forced to confront the severity of the situation. Serena's attempts to salvage her reputation devolved into panicked denials, her voice rising and breaking, each lie easily countered by documented evidence and calm testimony, leaving her isolated in her panic, a stark contrast to my controlled presentation. I could feel the room's energy shift, a collective recognition of justice unfolding, as I concluded the exposition with a statement that balanced emotional truth with moral clarity, reinforcing that my actions were not driven by vengeance alone, but by a necessity to reclaim agency, enforce accountability, and prevent further abuse. The climactic moment arrived when the gathered witnesses, previously hesitant, were invited to share brief accounts of their observations, each narrative reinforcing mine, creating an undeniable tapestry of truth that left Serena and my parents exposed, their manipulations and abuses laid bare in a public forum that ensured consequences could not be ignored. The room, once filled with polite chatter, now vibrated with intensity, the gravity of revelations forcing even distant relatives to reevaluate their perceptions, understand the depth of past abuses, and recognize the courage it took to orchestrate such a confrontation. Serena's social standing, previously built on charm and subtle intimidation, crumbled under the weight of collective recognition of her actions. My parents faced public scrutiny that challenged their authority and demanded acknowledgement of failures that could no longer be denied. As I observed the unfolding reactions, I experienced a mix of vindication, relief, and empowerment, a realization that calculated intelligence, careful preparation, and moral fortitude had transformed fear and suppression into a visible, undeniable demonstration of justice. The public confrontation concluded not with chaos but with clarity, the shockwaves resonating through the family network and the wider community, establishing a precedent for accountability, illustrating the consequences of manipulation and violence, even within the confines of family bonds, and cementing a transformative shift in relational dynamics that ensured my voice and agency could never be undermined again. By the end of the evening, the power dynamics had irrevocably shifted. Serena was socially isolated, my parents publicly challenged, and I had emerged not only vindicated but as a symbol of strategic intelligence, resilience, and the undeniable force of measured retaliation, a culmination of years of endurance and preparation realized in a single unforgettable night where the stakes, tension, and emotional intensity had reached their zenith, leaving an indelible mark on all who witnessed the dramatic confrontation. The morning after the public confrontation, the weight of what had transpired settled like a heavy fog over every corner of my life, a mixture of relief, exhaustion, and lingering adrenaline coursing through my veins, knowing that the previous night's revelations had irrevocably altered the dynamics within my family and the wider social circle. Every interaction now carried the residue of exposure, every glance from distant relatives or neighbors, charged with a new awareness of truth that could not be unlearned. Serena Kilm, once confident and untouchable within her sphere, now faced a wave of ostracism so immediate and severe that even casual acquaintances whispered warnings and expressed shock at her actions. The poison incident at my graduation, now common knowledge within the network of friends and relatives who had once admired her charm but now recoiled from her cruelty. My parents, Grady and Noella, were confronted with the undeniable reality of their complicity. Their previous authority diminished as the guests who had attended the confrontation shared their shock and disappointment in quiet, pointed ways, leaving my parents to grapple with guilt and public accountability that could not be mitigated by explanations or excuses. I experienced an unexpected but welcome sense of liberation, an emotional clarity that arose from finally articulating the truth and seeing it validated by witnesses. A realization that years of manipulation, fear, and suppression could no longer control me, and that my careful planning had ensured the consequences for Serena and my parents would be both visible and permanent. Legal ramifications began to take shape as well. With recorded evidence, messages, and witnesses now fully documented, I consulted attorneys to explore potential actions that would protect my safety and hold Serena accountable, knowing that the combination of social and legal consequences would reinforce the seriousness of her actions and prevent any future attempts at manipulation or harm. I also began to notice subtle shifts in the extended family conversations that once skirted around truth, now addressed the realities of emotional abuse and control, relatives expressing both relief at my courage and discomfort at their prior silence. A collective reflection on how family dynamics could perpetuate harm when accountability is ignored. Personally, I navigated an emotional landscape that was complex and often contradictory. Moments of joy and vindication were punctuated by the residual pain of betrayal, the scars of manipulation still present, but each reflection reinforced the knowledge that my intelligence, patience, and strategic action had transformed a situation of vulnerability into one of empowerment and public recognition. I faced Serena directly only once more, after the gathering, a brief encounter where her attempts at reconciliation were coldly rebuffed. Her posture, defensive eyes shifting with desperation, and I felt a profound sense of closure, knowing that no apology could erase the consequences she now faced, nor could it undo the years of control and intimidation she had wielded against me. Friends and supportive relatives reached out in increasing numbers, offering encouragement, validation, and recognition that the actions I had taken were not only necessary but exemplary in demonstrating resilience and strategic foresight. A network of support that reinforced my confidence and underscored the importance of measured, intelligent responses to abuse. I also documented my experiences for personal reflection and potential public sharing, aware that my story could serve as a cautionary tale and a model for others navigating toxic family dynamics, illustrating that exposure preparation and emotional fortitude could turn moments of vulnerability into catalysts for justice and empowerment. Serena's social decline continued gradually but unmistakably. Invitations ceased, communication was avoided, and even distant friends distanced themselves, creating a tangible barrier between her past influence and the present reality where her actions had consequences visible to all. My parents' relationship with me shifted as well, from a dynamic of authority and control to one defined by cautious acknowledgement of my autonomy and intelligence. Their attempts to reassert dominance met with polite firmness and unwavering boundaries that left them with little room to maneuver or manipulate. The wider community also absorbed the impact, neighbors and acquaintances commenting on the bravery required to confront deeply rooted family abuse. In such a public manner, conversations reinforcing that strategic exposure could achieve justice without resorting to uncontrolled anger or physical retaliation, that intelligence and preparation could be more powerful than impulsive revenge. Throughout the months that followed, I noticed subtle yet profound changes within myself. Increased confidence, a clearer understanding of my own moral compass, and a strengthened ability to detect manipulation and control. In any context, a personal evolution catalyzed by the public confrontation and the undeniable consequences it produced for those who had once sought to harm me. Ultimately, the fallout was not simply punitive, but transformative, reshaping family hierarchies, social relationships, and personal self-perception, establishing a narrative where truth, courage, and strategic action dictated outcomes rather than fear, suppression, or intimidation. A permanent record that demonstrated the efficacy of intelligent resistance against toxic familial control and the profound importance of confronting abuse with both clarity and precision. The consequences extended into practical aspects of life as well. Serena's attempts at social influence and professional networking were hampered by the visibility of her prior actions. My parents' credibility in certain community interactions diminished, and I found new opportunities emerging precisely because of the courage and foresight I had demonstrated, a tangible proof that measured retaliation and exposure could yield both justice and personal growth simultaneously. As I reflected on these months, I recognized that the combination of public confrontation, meticulous documentation, and careful emotional regulation had not only delivered consequences for those who had harmed me, but had also solidified my own resilience, establishing a foundation for future interactions free from fear manipulation and the persistent threat of family-induced trauma, a transformation that would remain evident in every aspect of my life. Weeks passed after the fallout, and life began to settle into a rhythm that was both unfamiliar and liberating, a sense of space and autonomy, replacing the constant tension that had dominated my existence under Serena Kilm's and my parents' control. Every morning, I woke with a renewed awareness that I no longer had to navigate hidden traps or anticipate cruelty, that my decisions, my movements, and my emotions belonged entirely to me, without fear of sabotage or judgment. I invested my energy into pursuits I had previously deferred, passions and ambitions that had been stifled under the shadow of family manipulation, from professional projects that allowed me to showcase skills I had hidden for years, to personal endeavors that nurtured both body and mind, cultivating resilience, confidence, and self-expression in ways I had once believed impossible. The relationships I had carefully preserved or cultivated outside the toxic family circle deepened friends and allies who had witnessed the graduation incident, reaching out not only with empathy but with active support, offering opportunities, guidance, and validation that strengthened my social and emotional foundation, demonstrating that courage and integrity often attract allies as much as they expose adversaries. Serena's presence diminished gradually from my life. A shadow of the former power she wielded, her attempts at contact sparse, awkward, and easily deflected, leaving her increasingly isolated and forced to confront the consequences of her own actions in solitude. While my parents, Grady and Noella, navigated a new dynamic with me, marked by cautious acknowledgement and respect for my boundaries, their previous dominance effectively neutralized by public exposure and the undeniable assertion of my agency. I reflected often on the journey that had led to this point, recognizing that the strategic choices I had made, the intelligence with which I had approached the confrontation, and the emotional restraint I had maintained, had collectively ensured not only personal safety, but the establishment of a lasting precedent that abuse control and manipulation could not persist unchecked when met with preparation and courage. The public acknowledgement of truth had also brought unexpected benefits, including professional recognition, social validation, and a broader awareness of the importance of confronting toxic dynamics before they escalate beyond control, reinforcing the lesson that accountability must be visible, consistent, and unyielding to effect meaningful change. Within my family, the residual tension shifted from hostility to an uneasy respect. Younger relatives observed the change and began questioning long-held assumptions about authority, manipulation, and compliance, offering me the opportunity to mentor, guide, and demonstrate by example that intelligence, patience, and moral clarity could achieve justice without succumbing to fear or retaliation. Personally, I experienced a profound transformation in self-perception, a growing confidence in my judgment, intuition, and ability to navigate complex social situations, as well as a strengthened commitment to protecting my own emotional well-being, maintaining boundaries, and cultivating relationships that were reciprocal, supportive, and grounded in honesty. The graduation incident, once a moment of acute fear and betrayal, became a defining point of empowerment, a story I could recount not only to affirm my resilience, but to caution others against complacency, manipulation, and toxic loyalty, illustrating that strategic exposure, emotional control, and public accountability could dismantle entrenched power structures without compromising integrity. Socially, the ripple effects continued, with neighbors, friends, and community members acknowledging the courage required to confront abuse in a public setting, often expressing admiration, respect, and curiosity about how I had managed to maintain composure, plan effectively, and achieve a resolution that balanced justice with personal growth, an acknowledgement that validated the months of effort, stress, and emotional labor I had invested. I also took steps to formalize protections for my future, from legal documentation to proactive communication with professional and social networks, ensuring that the lessons learned would safeguard not only my immediate circumstances, but also long-term independent safety and peace of mind. A demonstration of foresight and strategic thinking that mirrored the approach I had taken during the confrontation itself. Over time, the emotional wounds healed, gradually replaced by a sense of empowerment and clarity with moments of reflection, serving to reinforce rather than weaken, reminding me that strength arises from confrontation, perseverance, and the refusal to allow fear or intimidation to dictate the course of one's life. By the end of the year, I had established a new rhythm, a life marked by freedom, integrity, and deliberate choice with the toxic influence of Serena and my parents substantially diminished my personal agency, fully asserted, and my confidence in navigating both familial and social complexities reinforced by concrete experience, legal support, and the validation of witnesses who had observed the transformative confrontation. The lessons extended beyond immediate family dynamics, shaping how I approached professional challenges, personal relationships, and future social interactions, instilling a principle that preparation, intelligence, and measured assertiveness could achieve far more than reactive anger or avoidance, and that true empowerment lies in turning moments of vulnerability into catalysts for enduring strength and recognition. In this new beginning, I experienced both the quiet joy of reclaimed autonomy and the profound satisfaction of witnessing justice unfold with clarity, permanence, and moral authority, knowing that my actions had not only safeguarded my well-being, but had irrevocably altered the dynamics of my family, redefined social perceptions, and established a lasting precedent for accountability, courage, and intelligent resistance against manipulation. Ultimately, the journey from the shocking betrayal at my graduation to the restoration of self and the redefinition of familial relationships demonstrated that even the most intense and traumatic confrontations could yield empowerment, growth, and clarity. A story of triumph rooted not in revenge alone, but in strategic foresight, public accountability, and unwavering commitment to truth, a resolution that affirmed my agency and the enduring possibility of justice and personal liberation in the face of toxicity.